This week on Dream Deals, we'll be taking a look at the gentleman's classic, the Aston Martin. Brendan Coogan will be meeting the proud owner of a classic DB4. Plus, in part 2, we'll be giving you advice on how to get hold of another British legend at TVR. But first, Richard Hammond tests the latest DB7 Vantage Volant.
If it were any more British, it would be made of tweed and have a handlebar moustache on the front. The Aston Martin DB7 Vantage Volante, a very, very big car with a very big pedigree. Now yes, I know I've got an Aston Martin, and yes, I know there's a great big dam behind me, but no, I'm not doing any James Bond Aston Martin gags, okay? They've all been done before, so I promise it's cheesy and I won't do any. Not one. None. Fantastic. Pretty much everything about the Aston is enormous, not just the length and the girth of the thing, but the engine, 6-litre V12, over 400 brake horsepower, 6-speed gearbox, all big numbers. The only thing that isn't big, not big enough in fact, is the steering wheel. It's pathetic. I want something up here, a great big wooden rimmed monster of a thing you could steer a ship by. Astons have never been lightweight. I suppose all those years ago, whilst Jim Clark was frantically paring every last ounce off the chassis of his Lotus to make him go quicker, the folks at Aston's must have just la 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 la, or maybe they just revved one of their engines so they couldn't hear him. But hold on, got a bit of a problem here though. Soft top. It's not proper at all. Frankly, it's for girls. I mean, the playing fields of Eton didn't make us frightfully brave just so we can mince around in a giant hairdresser's chariot, did they? Some cars, really vulgar cars, suit having the top chopped. And then others, well, you might as well, because they're never going to be monsters to drive anyway. But an Aston Martin, well, it just doesn't seem right somehow. So enough of this wanton decadence, enough of this, frankly, continental display. I'm going to be sensible, like you should. And anyway, it looks like rain. Ah, that's much more like it. Now in this hushed environment, you can soak up the ambience of what demands to be called a cockpit. Walnut and leather. Breathe it in. If this were mine, which it is now because I'm not giving it back, I'd be smoking cigars in it just to make it smell proper and as it should. Whilst the looks are never ever going to disappoint, your heart will flutter every time you walk up to this thing. The drive though, yeah. Something to do with taking the top off, methinks. It's a bit like strapping a 6-litre V12 to one end of your bed and expecting it to go around corners nicely. It don't shake, rattle and roll, I'm afraid. That said, the sound of that V12 is very nice indeed. And it does romp along merry. There's a huge surge of mid-range, as you would expect there to be. It's just a long way from being pin-sharp and responsive. Of course, if you fancy it, you are going to need to be seriously minted. I mean, well wedged up. £102,000. Let me put it this way, you can have this car, or you could have all of these. Isn't it funny how some £100,000 cars encourage you to waft about waving regally, whilst others, Ferraris and such, tend to lead to rampant posing with rolling up of sports jacket sleeves and greasing of hair. But the Aston Martin, well, it's different. It's more about hooliganing about. It's just a giant automotive two-fingered salute to just about everyone, really. Let's go.
Now I know what you're thinking. Modern, British, classic, licensed to thrill, appeals to the ladies. But no, not me. We're talking about the Martin, Aston Martin. The epitome of British sports cars from the 60s. The gentleman's club of driving. Yes, it's a modern classic. So John, tell me, first of all, how long have you had this car?
I've had it for about 13 years. Been working on it all that time.
It started out as a 5-year restoration plan.
Oh, no, that was the previous one. And,
all right.
And my wife bet me I wouldn't have that on the road in 5 years, and she won that a long time ago.
So how long has this particular car been on the road?
Just 2.5 years, but it's not finished by a long shot yet.
So owning this particular Series 2, was that always an aspiration? Was that always your dream car?
No, just a good DB4. I like the DB4 best because it's the smallest. I love the shape. I would prefer a Vantage engine. That's three carb engine like the previous one I had that I've just sold. But this is okay. This is lovely, and the beauty about this is it's new, lot of new bodywork. I know it's going to be sound. I know it is sound, and if it scratches, you can touch it up because it's modern twin pack.
Sure.
The previous one was original cellulose from 1962, and I was always a bit apprehensive when you scratch it or dent it.
Yeah.
You never match that up.
Has it been worth it with all of the money you've spent and the time you've spent? Do you get a feeling of pride?
Absolutely. It's the money hasn't been all that much really when you think about it, but the joy it's given me and still gives me. I love working on it. In fact, my son says I'd rather have it in the garage working on it than driving it. But I like them both equally. It's probably less stressful working on it than driving it.
Sure. What is it like to drive? Because obviously it's a very old car. I mean, we wouldn't compare it to a modern car, but is it fun?
It's great fun. There's always a slight heightened anxiety mixed with the exhilaration and the joy of driving it. You must never have a tight schedule. You always give yourself plenty of time, because being old, you're not quite sure if you're definitely going to get there or not. You might have forgotten.
When you do,
something.
it's a bonus.
Oh, absolutely.
What do you think the Aston says about you? When as a traveller, people see you on the road, what do you think they're thinking? Or what does it say about you?
Well, I think in these old cars, they're not thinking, well, yeah, there's a rich fella. I think they're thinking probably there's a bit of a car nut. I think you've got to be a bit of a car nut.
A reasonably wealthy car nut.
Well, you've got to have sufficient money to buy the bits and
Sure.
to pay people to do some of the jobs. That's true. I mean, the front bumpers now, they're over £1,000 a piece.
If somebody's got £40,000 burning a hole in the pocket, like I haven't, would you recommend the Aston experience to people? I mean, is it an affordable classic?
It is an affordable classic, but it's far more affordable if you can do things on it yourself. I think you've got to be practical, a mechanical bent, or you've got to be pretty loaded. Get somebody else to do it. Excuse me.
It's all right.
But it's a real joy. They get a lifetime's of happiness out of it. There'll be anxiety. One of the big differences between the modern cars and this is you haven't got the reliability of the modern car. So there's always slightly anxiety when you're driving. You've got to keep your eye on the oil pressure, the temperature particularly. But
So you make it sound like having a child. Lots of moments of joy, but some of anxiety.
well, I think that's probably a very good comparison. Well, I would recommend it, but they'd have to get, if they didn't know much about them, get specialist advice, and there are lots of good advisors.
DB4 is undoubtedly an amazing car with looks and performance in equal measure, but it's not an affordable classic. You have to have deep love and deep pockets. But if you're rich and you've got time on your hands, then the DB4 is probably for you, and it's 41 years old. Ask yourself, where's Ursula Andress now?
That's it for part 1, but join us in part 2 when we'll show you the best way to get hold of a TBR. Plus, we'll be taking a drive in a classic Porsche 911.
Now ask yourself this question: which car manufacturer offers you more thrills for your money per mile than any other? Think you know? Well, what if I told you they were British? Any guesses? The answer is, of course, Blackpool's very own TBR. Now, all TBRs are hand-built and a lot of care and attention goes into making each one. But like any used car, they are susceptible to the odd problem. So in this week's Buyer's Guide, we're going to help you avoid the pitfalls and find yourself a really good TBR.
TBR engineering was originally formed by Trevor Wilkinson in 1947. The first true TBR model rolled off the production line in 1949. For the next 30 years, the company had a somewhat turbulent time with the constant threat of closure looming over them. In 1982, Peter Wheeler invented the modern TBR, a car that planted the seed of TBR's current success story.
Do you sell many of these?
Yeah, I mean that represents very good value for money. That's a 1998 model Cerbera Speed 6. The Speed 6 has got the 4-litre straight 6 engine developed by TBR, 24 valve unit, producing 360 brake horsepower. That'll give you very similar performance, not quite as quick as the 4.5, but certainly not far behind. And if anything, it's a more usable day-to-day car. The Speed 6 engine is very smooth, very progressive power delivery.
Are there any particular, because obviously these cars, I mean, what are the starting prices for a second-hand Cerbera?
Well, we do have Cerberas, early ones from 1996. They start from as little as £21,000. Having said that, I think a low mileage Speed 6 from about 98 does represent very good value at just around the 30.
Now this is a much more common example of a second-hand TBR, the Griffith. Tell us about performance first of all.
Yeah, the performance is incredible. It comes with a 5-litre V8 engine, offers 0 to 60 in 4.1 seconds, a top speed of approximately 160 miles an hour. I can't think of any car that gives you more thrills per pound.
In terms of cost, what would you be looking to pay for a very early model?
You can pay anywhere from about 12 to 13,000 for one of the early ones. Having said that, the best value for money really would be a Griffith 5-litre from 95 onwards. At that time it received the later spec engine, what they call the Serpentine spec engine. It's also got the later gearbox, it's a Borg-Warner T5 box. And those cars from 95 onwards will sell for somewhere in the late teens upwards, so certainly 17,000, 18,000 will get you a very nice example.
What sorts of things should we be looking out for that tell the telltale signs that they've been driven perhaps on a track or perhaps a bit too hard?
Yeah, I mean you can look at the general wear and tear on the trim, etc. Tyre wear is always a good indication. If it's been used for track use, they'll generally feather the edges of the tyres. Curb damage on the wheels, we always have a good close look at the road wheels. That gives a good indication as to how it's been used. Typically a used car might have a little stone chipping across the nose, and that's nothing to be worried about.
Are there any sort of hidden pitfalls with TBRs, any sort of hidden costs that you buy it and then suddenly a year down the line find that it's got to have an engine overhaul or anything?
There shouldn't be. On the Griffith and the Chimera, they use the Rover V8 engine. It's been around for many years. It'll do very high mileages with minimum maintenance.
These are the cars that you shift most of, yeah, in terms of second-hand TBRs?
The Chimera's been the biggest selling car for TBR by far. It was launched in 1993 and was based very closely round the Griffith. She has the same chassis, same suspension. The Chimera has been available over the years with various sizes of the Rover engine, from 4-litre, 4.3, 4.5 or 5-litre.
Now, there are some people, this is a general TBR question, that, as you say, the components are made up of several different cars, that unkind people have said it's a bit of a kit car, and obviously we know better. What would you say to allay people's fears in that respect?
It can be an advantage that TVR on the Griffith and the Camaro have used a lot of standard components over the years. It means that the maintenance bills are relatively small, and you know, they are good quality components that have been used.
In terms of buying a TVR, any TVR, what would you recommend people were doing if they see one second-hand and it's not a dealership like this? Should they have it overlooked by a specialist, or should they come to a specialist to buy one?
I would think anybody considering buying a car of that nature would be well advised to have a full inspection, either an independent inspection by the AA, RAC, or a specialist.
With limited production runs and a high level of popularity, prices for used TVRs remain high. A 1992 4-litre Griffith could be yours for just under £13,000, while a 1996 Cerbera 4.2 could cost you around £23,000.
The lines and styling of the TVR are beautiful, and yet the noise it makes is just so aggressive and nasty. Being a TVR, it of course doesn't like the wet. It's like meat and beans. In moderation it's okay, but if you have too much, then the consequences could be fatal. Too much wet weather and this TVR is useless. You might as well just have a Mondeo. But in the dry, the grip and handling is fantastic. The one thing I would recommend when buying a used TVR is to go for a simple engined one. Some of the later cars do have quite sophisticated computers on board, and that can mean money when getting serviced. Pound for pound, the TVR is of course fantastic value, but you can say that of brand new TVRs, and the second-hand models are no exception. You get a huge amount of car, and I mean huge amount of car for your money. You have to take into consideration things like whether it stops, what it's like in the wet, but that's the same for any TVR. It is a vast amount of car. It's a huge beast. I've no idea where that corner is. I know where that corner is, and I know where the edge of the car is, but it's just acres wide and acres long. And it's got acres of oomph.
Porsche have always held a special place in the heart of many, and no car more so than the 911. Despite being around for nearly 40 years, the car is as popular as ever, with the classic lines of the original still evident, even in the latest 996 model. But what is it that makes people want to buy a 911?
Why did I buy the 911? Because I've always wanted a 911. I think you see them in one of two ways. Either you look at them as a bit of a wide boys car, or you see them as one of the ultimate sports cars. And I guess I see it as one of the ultimate sports cars. In performance terms, it's deceptively quick still, even more. I mean, this thing's 20 years old. But even compared to some of the hotter hot hatches from Saxo VTS, this thing will stomp them just because of its mid-range torque. There's just so much power, and it's very, very easy to suddenly find yourself going very, very quickly. So yeah, it's still a hot performer. Even now, after all those years, it is still a very fast car. I don't know if you call the 911 difficult to drive. It can be a bit challenging, particularly the old buses like this. On a wet day, you've just got to be really careful. It's a rear-wheel drive, powerful car with all the weight somewhere back there. But at the same time, it's incredibly direct. The response is sometimes too brutal. The ride is perfect for a sports car, and best of all, you've always got that noise. Absolutely fantastic. One of the reasons I bought it was I wanted something that was a bit special, that could be a bit of a toy, but that I could also use and not worry about either knocking huge chunks of value off by adding miles on, or more to the point, that's not going to leave me stranded by the side of the motorway, but let's be honest, looking a bit of a berg. I think the main thing looking after a 911, an old one like this, okay, if you've gone out and spent £86,000 on a new one, you're going to take it straight back to the dealer to have it serviced. But when you're looking at an old, basically cheap sports car like this, you do not want to be spending £2,000 a service. You've got to find a small independent specialist who knows 911s inside out, and then they are not bad. There's 1,000,001 patent parts made, it depends. I'm not going for a concours car, this isn't for competition, this isn't to sit and look pretty, I just want to use the thing. So I don't mind if the brake pads have got Porsche written on them or not, as long as they stop it. So there's no need for it to be colossally expensive. I actually bought this 911 on kind of my second bout of looking to buy a 911 because the first time out I chickened out. I just thought, oh, it's going to cost a fortune, it's going to break. So I'd looked at loads and loads and loads. But again, if you're spending £30,000 on a Porsche, then you've got to get it right. I mean, you want full Porsche service history, you want the works. When you're buying, let's be honest, cheaply like I did, get it checked out by a specialist. If they reckon it's sound, that's about as much as you can do, to be honest. You can't start insisting on full Porsche service history when you're at the bottom of the market. That said, I'm absolutely chuffed to bits. I don't know if Rufus and I will ever be parted. If we were, I've always kind of thought all along that it would be another Porsche. And one of the reasons I was quite happy to buy a left-hand drive one, apart from the fact that I've usually had left-hand drive cars for some reason and they're cheaper, was that when I come to part exchange it will probably be for another Porsche, and if you go to the right dealer then they'll look quite happily on a left hooker. It shouldn't be too difficult to get rid. But I don't know that I ever will replace it. Maybe just another Porsche. Nah, there couldn't be another Greek colour.
Despite various attempts by Porsche to replace the 911, all have failed. Throughout its life, the car has not only delivered the looks and the performance expected, but also the ability to be driven every day. Unwittingly or not, Porsche built a true sports car that everyone could drive and love.
Well, that's it for this episode of Dream Deals, but be sure to join us next week when Adam Cole will be testing Mazda's legendary MX-5. Plus, Brendan Coogan will give you practical advice on how to get hold of Toyota's best-loved sports cars, the MR2 and the Celica.